George Vance's voice echoed through the executive boardroom of Vance Global as I walked past the frosted glass doors. Innovation comes from youth, he was saying, his tone performative and loud, like he was pitching to a room full of yes-men. I did not stop walking. I had heard that exact sermon before. I heard it at my wedding 3 years ago, when he toasted my wife Sarah for marrying a dependable guy and then patted me on the back like I was a stray dog he had allowed into his yard. For 3 years I had worked 14-hour days, logged in on weekends, and kept this logistics and supply chain company from collapsing under the weight of outdated systems and family nepotism. But to George, I was just the son-in-law. In his eyes, that meant I was an overpaid assistant who should be grateful for a seat at the table. He called it corporate fairness. I called it systematic humiliation. I was 58 years old, with 30 years of experience in logistics and systems engineering. When Sarah and I got married, I agreed to leave my consulting practice and join Vance Global as the Senior Director of Operations. I thought it would be a way to build something lasting for the family. Instead, it became a daily exercise in being ignored. George liked the optics of keeping me at the operations level while he played the noble patriarch. He doled out opportunities to outside VPs while keeping me on a tight leash. But I knew the truth. Nepotism did not help me. It buried me. I built the entire logistics pipeline. I negotiated supplier exclusivity with firms that had not returned George's calls in a decade. I turned a department that used to run on Google Sheets and crossed fingers into a functional machine that generated 22% profit growth year over year. Yet, no one clapped. Half the executives in the building still thought my name was Miller's brother, or confused me with the head of maintenance. The only time my name was ever mentioned in an internal memo, it was under travel policy enforcement because I had canceled a VP's trip to Aspen when he tried to expense a couple's massage. That same VP, Jeff, once asked me if I was the receptionist's assistant. I run 5 departments, Jeff, but sure, I will fetch your latte if it helps you sleep at night. Then came the big pitch I landed last quarter with Summit Retail. It was a massive deal. I wrote 48 pages of contract strategy, spent 7 months on setup calls, and rolled out a custom API dashboard. When the deal closed, the client sent George a gift basket addressed to me. He ate the chocolates and forwarded me a blurry photo of the card with a thumbs-up emoji. Still, I stayed. A part of me believed that hard work would eventually outshine bloodlines. But I was not stupid. If you have ever been in a job where you know you are the backbone, but no one notices until you leave, you know why I started printing receipts. I bookmarked emails, access logs, licensing agreements, and contract renewals. That is how I ended up staring at one particular clause I had negotiated in the agreement with Polaris Partners, our primary supplier. It was Clause 7.2, buried in a renewal packet. I had insisted on inserting a specific covenant. It stated that I, Edward Miller, was the designated exclusive liaison for all component fulfillment, and that any transfer of the liaison role required 30 days' notice and written approval from Polaris Partners' legal department. The company lawyer had blinked at me when I insisted on it. "Why?" she asked. "Isn't that unusual?" I just smiled and said that sometimes you do not know you are being erased until they need your handwriting. So there I was, 3 years in, 1 foot ready to pivot, and still hoping my father-in-law might just once say, "Nice job, Edward." What I got instead was a company-wide breakfast with catered pastries and a smiling intern named Julian. George had been extra chipper that week. He kept whistling old songs off-key and strolling around the office like a man who had just won the lottery. My wife Sarah mentioned over dinner that her father had met up with his old golf buddy, Donald, and that Donald's son, Julian, had just finished his degree and needed a place to start. A week later, Julian showed up. He had teeth that were too white, a handshake that was too firm, and designer dress shoes that looked like they belonged on a mannequin. Everyone fell over themselves welcoming him. George gave him a tour personally. I had been there 3 years and still did not have a reserved parking spot. But Julian was handed a window desk with dual monitors on day 1. I was still working off the laptop I had paid for with my own money. On his 3rd day, Julian strolled over to my desk. "Hey, Edward," he said, leaning against my partition. "Do you have the login for the master logistics drive? I need to look over the vendor files." I looked up at him. I will ask Hyde to onboard you, I said with a polite smile. And just a heads up, you will want to read through the supplier exclusivity clauses, especially the ones with Polaris partners. It is trickier than it looks. Julian blinked, looking bored. Exclusivity? Sure, whatever. I will figure it out. I tapped my temple. Vendor management lives up here, Julian. If you do not know where the bones are buried, you will get lost. He just laughed and walked away. 2 weeks later, the whispers started. An accidental reply-all email from the CFO's assistant revealed that George was launching a massive new initiative called Project Elevate. It was a project designed to double our logistics revenue by streamlining high-volume clients through a proprietary API dashboard. It was the exact dashboard I had spent 8 months designing in my spare time between fixing corrupted files and putting out supplier fires. Naturally, I assumed I would lead it. My team had already run a pilot that cut lead times by 18%. We were ready. Then one night, Sarah walked into the kitchen, looking uneasy. "My dad is talking about Project Elevate," she said, pouring a glass of water. "He told Donald that he is incredibly impressed with the foundation. He said it is the future of the company." "Did he say he was giving it to me?" I asked. Sarah looked down. "He said he wants to introduce a fresh perspective. He thinks you are too valuable running the day-to-day operations to be tied down with a launch." I did not reply. I just sipped my tea and smiled. The princess did not get the castle. She got passed over for the squire who once fixed the drawbridge and called it innovation. I had seen this play before, and I already knew how it ended. The next morning, I showed up at the office at 7 a.m., beating the cleaning crew. I spent 2 hours cleaning my inbox, archiving correspondence, and organizing my files. I forwarded a final set of operations reports to George with clean charts and optimized metrics. It was all killer, no filler. His response was a single thumbs-up emoji. Later that afternoon, I saw George, Donald, and Julian at the cafe across the street. They were sharing sandwiches, and Julian was grinning like he had just been knighted. They did not see me. I watched them from the sidewalk, iced coffee sweating in my hand. George was gesturing with his hands, explaining a vision. My vision, to be exact. Julian was nodding along, despite the fact that he still had to ask me the difference between a bill of lading and a purchase order. Back at the office, Julian had placed a sticky note on his monitor. "Call Polaris guy. Ask about clause." I stared at that note for 10 seconds before walking into the break room to pour myself another cup of coffee. The stage was set, and George was about to play his hand. The next day, an invite appeared in my calendar. Operations Alignment and Project Elevate announcement. It was scheduled for the following morning, and George had ordered catered pastries. In our office, pastries only appeared when George wanted to soften a blow. The last time we had pastries, the entire operations team in Boston got laid off, and the manager found out via a calendar cancellation. When I walked into the conference room, the table was lined with fruit skewers and croissants. The department heads, project managers, and VPs were already seated. I took my usual seat halfway down the left side. It was my spot for strategic invisibility, honed over 3 years of survival. George entered last, flanked by Julian, who was wearing a brand new blazer with the tags probably still in the pocket. Julian carried a leather folder like it was a shield. "Team," George began, projecting his voice with that performative warmth he reserved for board members and golf buddies. "As you all know, we are embarking on a major expansion. Project Elevate is our future." He clicked a button, and a slide appeared on the screen. It was in Comic Sans, displaying a colorful flowchart of my dashboard. "We have realized that to take this company to the next level, we need to approach our supply chain with fresh eyes," George continued. "We need a perspective that isn't bogged down by the old ways of doing things, and that is why I am thrilled to announce that Julian will be leading Project Elevate as our new interim strategic innovation lead." A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the room. It was the kind of silence where everyone's common sense goes to die. People shifted in their chairs. One project manager coughed, trying to cover up a gasp. I sat perfectly still. Then I smiled, and I clapped. 3 quiet, polite claps. "Thank you, George," I said softly. The rest of the room followed my lead, clapping awkwardly. Julian stood up, adjusting his collar. Thanks, everyone. Really honored. Can't wait to lead this team and show you what we can do." George never looked at me. My name was not mentioned. There was no nod to the 8 months I had spent building the API, no acknowledgement of my team's pilot results. To the board, it would look like Julian had walked in and revolutionized the company's tech stack. To George, it was a perfect handoff. He got to keep his son-in-law working the gears in the basement while his buddy's son took the spotlight. I did not storm out. I did not raise my voice. I went back to my desk, opened a new document on my screen, and drafted my resignation. It was one sentence. I, Edward Miller, resign from my position as Senior Director of Operations, effective 2 weeks from today. 2 hours later, Julian walked over to my desk. He looked flustered, holding a printed copy of the Polaris Partners Agreement. "Hey, Edward," he said, tapping the paper. "Do you have the source code for the Polaris dashboard integration? I am looking at the contract terms, and I don't really get how the API renewal is triggered." I looked at him, letting the silence stretch until he started to fidget. I gave him a calm, polite smile. "That is not my job anymore, Julian," I said. "What?" He blinked. "What do you mean?" I stood up, gathered my mug, and walked toward the break room. "You are the strategic innovation lead. I am sure you will find a fresh perspective on it." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Sarah. I told her what had happened at the meeting and showed her the draft of my resignation letter. She stared at the screen, her expression a mix of anger and sadness. "He really did it," she whispered. "He gave your dashboard to Julian. He did," I said. Sarah looked at me. "What are you going to do?" "I am resigning, Sarah. I have spent 3 years trying to earn your father's respect. But at 58, I have realized that you cannot buy entry into a club where the rules are rigged against you." "I support you, Edward," she said, reaching out to take my hand. "But you know my dad. He will think you are just throwing a tantrum. He will think he can replace you in a week." "Let him think that," I said, smiling. "The machine only works because I am the one turning the crank. Let's see what happens when the crank stops." George's office smelled of expensive mahogany and poor decisions. He sat behind his desk on the phone, waving me in with a single finger while flipping through a folder. "Yeah, Donald," he was saying into the receiver. "We are launching the pilot next week. Julian is quarterbacking the whole integration. It is going to be seamless." Quarterback, I almost chuckled. Julian could not quarterback a high school bake sale. George hung up, adjusted his gold watch, and looked at me with his signature paternal smile. "Edward, come in," he said. "Big day. I hope you are ready to support Julian during the transition. We need your operational expertise to keep the wheels turning while he handles the strategy." I walked over to his desk and placed a crisp, white envelope directly on the mahogany wood. "What is this?" George asked, his smile faltering. "My resignation," I said, my voice calm and even. 2 weeks' notice. My last day will be the 4th of next month." George stared at the envelope. He opened it, read the single sentence, and then looked up, his face turning a deep, angry crimson. "You are joking, right?" he said, his voice rising. "No, George, I am not joking." He leaned back, throwing the paper onto the desk. "This is childish, Edward. Is this because of the project? You are taking this personally. We made a strategic business decision to use Julian's credentials for the launch. It is better for the optics. You are the backbone of our operations. We cannot afford to pull you away. You made it personal, the moment you decided my work belonged to someone else," I said. "I built Project Elevate. I built the API. I negotiated the exclusivity terms. And now you want me to train your golf buddy's son to take the credit. I am done." George stood up, leaning over the desk. "You think you can just walk out? We have contracts to fulfill. The Polaris integration is next week. Then Julian will have to integrate it," I said. "I will spend the next 2 weeks cleaning up my active files and organizing a transition document. I will transfer all basic administrative access to IT." "You are making a mistake, Edward," George warned, his voice turning cold. "If you walk out now, do not think you can come crawling back when your consulting practice fails." "I will keep that in mind," I said. I turned and walked out. The moment I got back to my desk, I sent a blind carbon copy of a pre-drafted email from my personal phone. The recipient was Valerie, the VP of Operations at Polaris Partners. The subject line read, "Notice of Contractual Liaison Departure, Edward Miller." The email was simple. It notified Polaris Partners' legal department that as of the 4th of next month, I would no longer be employed by Vance Global, and therefore, my status as the exclusive liaison under Clause 7, 2 of our agreement would terminate. I knew exactly what that meant. Under Clause 7.2, Polara Partners was legally barred from sharing API data or processing component shipments with any other representative from Vance Global without a 30-day vetting process and written approval from their legal counsel. It was a security measure I had put in place to protect our data. Now it was a wall. For the next 2 weeks, I was the model employee. I arrived on time, archived my emails, and wrote a 10-page transition document that outlined everything from server addresses to password policies. But I left a few key fields blank. I labeled them things like Polaris API auth key, pending legal clearance. It looked perfectly professional. Julian spent those 2 weeks strutting around the office like a CEO in training. He scheduled 3 brainstorming sessions with marketing to design a logo for Project Elevate. He even ordered custom mugs with the project name on them. He did not ask me a single technical question. On my final Friday, I packed my personal notebook, my mug, and my laptop charger. No one threw a party. George stayed in his office with the door shut. Julian was at a lunch meeting with his father. I walked out of the building at 5 p.m., feeling the first breath of clean air in 3 years. The next Monday, I leased a desk in a quiet co-working suite downtown. It smelled of eucalyptus and fresh paint. I registered my new business entity, Miller Logistics Consulting LLC, and opened a business bank account. On Tuesday morning, the gears of Vance Global began to grind. It started with a text message from a junior developer on my old team. "Hey Edward, sorry to bother you, but Julian is trying to run the Polaris data sync, and the system is throwing a restricted access error. Do you know the bypass?" I did not reply. I archived the message. By Wednesday afternoon, the situation had escalated. Polaris Partners had officially halted all shipments to Vance Global. Julian had tried to bypass the API restrictions by using my old admin credentials, which triggered an automated security lockdown. Polaris's system flagged it as an unauthorized intrusion. Without those components, Vance Global's assembly line was dead. And that was just the first domino. On Thursday, the second domino fell. Horizon Technologies, our secondary shipping vendor, sent a formal notice to Vance Global's billing department. Under the terms of their contract, Vance Global was subject to a daily delay penalty of $15, zeros in for any container left at the port for more than 48 hours. I had negotiated a waiver for this penalty, but the contract explicitly stated that the waiver was only valid while I, Edward Miller, was personally supervising the logistics integration. Without my signature on the weekly compliance reports, the waiver expired. Suddenly, Vance Global was losing $15,000 a day, and their primary supplier had shut off the valve. Julian, in his infinite wisdom, decided to call a crisis meeting with Summit Retail, the massive client that represented 18% of Vance Global's annual revenue. He wanted to reassure them that Project Elevate was on track. One of the project managers leaked the Zoom audio recording to me. "We are just experiencing some minor API alignment issues." Julian's voice stammered on the recording, sounding thin and panicked. "Our dev team is working on a patch. It should be resolved in a couple of weeks." The Summit Retail representative was not amused. "Julian, we have 40,000 units sitting at the port of Tacoma. Your contract states that the automated dashboard would be live today. If we do not have real-time tracking by Friday, we are invoking our cancellation clause. Who is managing the integration now?" I am," Julian said. "I am the strategic innovation lead." "Where is Edward Miller?" the representative asked. "He was the architect of this system." "Edward is no longer with the company," Julian replied, "but I am fully capable of handling this." The Summit representative paused. "If Edward isn't there, who holds the licensing agreement for the proprietary dashboard framework?" "We need the compliance signatures," Julian sputtered. "The licensing?" It is in the company drive. We own it. We will need verification of that by tomorrow morning," the representative said, and the call disconnected. My phone rang at 3 p.m. on Tuesday. The caller ID showed George's personal number. I let it ring. He called again 10 minutes later. I poured a cup of tea, sat back, and answered on the third ring. "Edward," George's voice came through the line. It was missing its usual swagger. It sounded strained, older. "Hello, George," I said, keeping my tone professional. "We have a bit of a situation here," George said, trying to sound casual. There seems to be some confusion with the Polaris integration. Their legal department is refusing to talk to Julian, and they have frozen our shipments. I need you to jump on a call with Valerie and clear this up. I am no longer an employee of Vance Global, George, I said. I do not have the authority to speak on behalf of your company. Come on, Edward, George pleaded. We are family. Sarah's future is tied to this company. If we lose the Summit account, it will wipe out our Q4 numbers. I am asking you to help us out. I smiled. My wife's future is secure, George, but my consulting rate is different from my old salary. George cleared his throat. What are you asking for? I will send you a formal consulting proposal, I said. It will outline my terms. You can review it with your board. I hung up and emailed the document I had drafted the day before. The terms were simple. 1. A monthly retainer of $20,000 with a 90-day minimum paid up front. 2. A consulting fee of $300 per hour for any operations work. 3. Full veto power over all vendor communications regarding Project Elevate. 4. The immediate removal of Julian from any strategic or operational role related to my systems. I knew George would hate it. He would see it as an insult. But I also knew he had 40,000 units rotting at the port of Tacoma, and the clock was ticking. The next morning I received a notification on my phone. The proposal had been opened 15 times, but there was no email response. George was trying to find a way around me. He had called Polaris Partners directly, only to be told by Valerie's office that they would only discuss the liaison role with me or my legal representative. By Friday afternoon, the pressure reached a boiling point. The CFO had run the numbers. Vance Global was facing $105, zero in port penalties, and Summit Retail had officially sent a notice of intent to terminate their contract. George had no cards left to play. The emergency board meeting at Vance Global did not feature catered pastries. The atmosphere in the room was cold, tense, and silent. George sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled. Across from him sat the company's chief legal counsel, holding a red folder. "We have a serious problem, George," the lawyer said, placing the folder on the table. "I have reviewed the exit agreement you signed with Edward when he resigned." "What about it?" George muttered. "It was a standard release." "It was not," the lawyer replied. Section D, Clause 4B explicitly states that Edward Miller retains all intellectual property rights to the proprietary logistics, dashboard, and API framework he authored, unless those rights were formally transferred to the company under board approval before his departure. George blinked. That is ridiculous. He built it while working for us. It belongs to the company. He built the prototype in his spare time before the project was officially funded, and he registered the copyright under his own name, the lawyer explained. Under federal copyright law, specifically 17 USAC, Section 106, he holds the exclusive rights to reproduce and distribute that work. When you signed the exit agreement, you signed a contract that confirmed his ownership of the IP. Because we are currently running the pilot program for our clients, using his framework, we are in direct violation of federal law. If he files an infringement suit, the court will issue an injunction. We will have to shut down the entire system immediately. George's jaw dropped. The room erupted into quiet panic. The CFO covered his face with his hands. "How did this happen?" The board chair demanded, looking at George. "You told us the system was fully owned by the corporation. You told us the intern could handle the integration." I didn't read the IP exclusion clause closely," George stammered. "I thought it was just standard legal boilerplate. Your negligence has put the entire company at risk," the chair said, his voice dripping with contempt. "We are facing a multi-million-dollar breach of contract suit from Summit Retail, $105,000 in port penalties, and a federal copyright lawsuit from your own son-in-law." The lawyer turned to George. "We have no leverage. If we do not accept Edward's consulting terms, the company will face bankruptcy by the end of the quarter." Julian, who was sitting at the far end of the table, stood up. He did not say a word. He gathered his leather folder, his custom Project Elevate mug, and quietly walked out of the room. No one stopped him. No one even looked at him. Later that afternoon, my phone pinged. A wire transfer of $60,000. The 3-month retainer had been deposited into my business account. Within 10 minutes, an email arrived from George's office. The attached document was the signed consulting agreement, along with a formal board resolution approving the terms. Consider us retained, the email read. I printed the confirmation, walked over to the wall of my co-working suite, and taped it next to my business license. I labeled it, my favorite apology. The next day, I called Valerie at Polaris Partners and authorized the release of the API keys. I signed the compliance waiver for Horizon Technologies, halting the port penalties. But I did not go back to the office. I ran the integration from my co-working suite. I spent 3 hours setting up the systems, routing the data, and clearing the backlog. By Friday evening, the Tacoma containers were moving and the Summit Retail dashboard was fully live. On Monday morning, the operations director from Summit Retail called me directly. "Edward, we saw the dashboard go live," he said. "The integration is flawless. We want to move our entire logistics advisory contract to your firm. We are terminating our strategic agreement with Vance Global." I accepted. The deal was worth $180,000 annually, more than my entire salary at Vance Global. Over the next 6 months, 2 other mid-tier clients followed Summit Retail's lead, moving their logistics consulting to my firm. Vance Global survived the Q4 crisis, but they were no longer the dominant player. George was forced to step down as CEO, replaced by a professional executive hired by the board. Last week, Sarah and I hosted a small dinner party at our home to celebrate the expansion of my consulting practice. We sat on the back deck, drinking wine and watching the sun set over the garden. Sarah smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I am proud of you, Edward," she said. "You built this on your own terms." I looked at her, feeling a deep, quiet peace. "I did," I said. "George always believed that people were loyal to the brand, that the logo on the building was what kept the business alive. He was wrong. People are loyal to results, to the relationships you build, and to the quiet competence of the people who actually turn the gears. When you treat those people like they are replaceable, you eventually find out that the only thing you have left is an empty room and a custom mug."